How do you turn the sound up?
Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society's Historical Group and the presentation this evening from Dr Jan Graffius with Gilly Read, Fellow of the Royal Photographic Society and Chair of the Historical Group. And with that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Gilly, who will introduce Jan and this evening for you.
Hello.
That's good, Gilly. Carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Michael said, I'm Gilly Read, and I'm chair of the Royal Photographic Society's Historical Group. I would like to introduce you tonight to Dr Jan Graffius, who is Curator of Collections at Stonyhurst College near Clitheroe in Lancashire. The collections at Stonyhurst are eclectic and extraordinary, and as well as many religious relics relating to Stonyhurst's role as one of the leading Catholic schools, they include a Shakespeare first folio, Dürer engravings, and what concerns us here tonight, a large collection of photographs by Roger Fenton. In this collection, there are photographs by Roger Fenton of Crimble Hall, who in 1853 became the first secretary of the Photographic Society, now the Royal Photographic Society. Roger Fenton studied in London and gained a first-class BA degree. He then read law at University College. He studied painting in Paris with Paul Delaroche and others. And on returning to England, he became interested in photography after visiting the 1851 Great Exhibition in Hyde Park. He is particularly well known for his photographs of the Crimean War and the royal family, but there are many more sides to his work. He photographed many and varied subjects such as still life and also photographed the collections at the British Museum. He travelled abroad and in Britain taking landscape photographs, some of which were published by Francis Frith. He lived near Stonyhurst College and he photographed the school and the surrounding countryside. In some of these photographs taken by Fenton in and around Stonyhurst, it is those that Dr Graffius is going to introduce to us and talk to us about tonight. So I will now introduce Dr Graffius.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
Hey.
The host has to do that.
Is that obvious now, Michael?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm not very technical, so I do apologise. Thank you so much, Gilly and Michael, for asking me to do this evening. I'm looking forward to this very much. I have to say right at the very beginning, I'm not a photographic historian. I'm a curator who has had the extraordinary good fortune to have these wonderful images in my care. The Fenton photographs of Stonyhurst and the surrounding countryside represent some of his most remarkable images and tell some fascinating stories. They were taken in the summer and winter of 1859 and reveal a complex relationship between an ancient English Catholic college and one of the giants of 19th century photography. My interest in these beautiful images was sparked by the fact that we have three more or less complete sets of the images in some better condition than others. There are about 60 images in each set, and we have 2 full sets and a partial set, so 140 photographs in my care in the college's historic libraries. And before proceeding any further, I would like to acknowledge a huge debt of gratitude to my friend Roger Taylor. Our connection grew from the Metropolitan Museum in New York exhibition of Fenton some 17 years ago. And in the succeeding years, I've become increasingly indebted to him for his unsurpassed expertise and generous, warm, infectious enthusiasm. So Roger, if you're watching, thank you. Our story begins in 1593. A debate that year in the House of Commons proposed removing Catholic children from their parents at the age of 7 after the Spanish Armada of 1588. After that particular event, English Catholics were viewed with increasing suspicion by the Elizabethan government and subjected to escalating penalties, financial and capital. The college was set up in the Spanish Netherlands under the protection of Philip of Spain. You can see here the extent of the buildings, cloistered like an Oxford college, with libraries, theatres, orchestra rooms, airy classrooms, a hospital, chapels, printing house, very important that, bakeries, slaughterhouse, and of course, 2 football pitches and a cricket pitch. Catholic parents were banned from sending their sons abroad for an education in popery. The penalties inflicted by their own government were severe. 1/3 of parental income was sequestrated. Children were removed from their families. They were disinherited, their parents imprisoned. The boys, as you can see in this 1679 satirical playing card, were smuggled across the channel in disguise, under assumed names, not to see their families for more than 8 years. As well as sending their sons abroad, English Catholic parents also sent a variety of remarkable artifacts which had been rescued from the destruction of the English Reformation. These included medieval manuscripts, relics, silver, vestments, and all manner of other Catholic material culture. These were sent across the channel to our school for safekeeping. The vestment details that you can see here was one of a set of red velvet damask and cloth of gold chasubles commissioned by Henry VII in 1495. It was intended for the coronation of his son, Prince Arthur, in Westminster Abbey. It was used at the coronation of Henry VIII, and then taken by Henry VIII to the Field of Cloth of Gold. The vestments were sequestrated during the Reformation by unknown Catholics and smuggled to our school, where they represented an ancient English Catholic past. After 200 years on the continent, in 1794, the French Revolution forced the college to evacuate to an England that had only just repealed its most stringent anti-Catholic laws, a country which largely viewed Catholicism and any French association with Jacobites or regicide as deeply suspicious. The college moved in small, tattered groups of pupils, preserving as much of their precious medieval collections as possible, ending up at Stonyhurst on August the 23rd, 1794, the boys' shoes held together with bits of string, having walked from Skipton. The house belonged at that point to the Catholic Weld family, who had been pupils at the college since the 17th century, and whose family had been resident on this spot since the 12th century. The Turner painting you see here shows the house in 1799. Half-ambitious Elizabethan prodigy house, cut short by punitive penal legislation from 1590 onwards. Here the college settled, quietly establishing itself in one of the most traditionally Catholic counties in England. The connection between Stonyhurst and the Fenton family is, on the surface, curious. The Jesuits were regarded as the vanguard of traditional Catholicism, taking an express vow of papal loyalty. The Fentons were nonconformists, not a natural match, you might say. Joseph Fenton, Roger Fenton's grandfather, was an entrepreneur whose wealth led him to establish a bank. His successful cotton mill and investments made him an exceptionally rich man. Like many such, he sought to elevate his social status to that of landed gentlemen. In 1829, he bought the substantial estates at Ayton, Bailey, Chagley, Dutton, and Ribchester. These were being sold by Thomas Weld, whose family had donated the Stonyhurst estate to the college. The estate encompassed some 8,000 acres of prime fishing and shooting rights. You can see here from the description how immensely attractive these were. Rich, fertile country, the scenery of which is scarcely to be surpassed. Beautiful and picturesque situations. Luxuriant scenery, well stocked with game, several powerful streams. Joseph Fenton paid the substantial price of £36,000 in 1829 for the privilege of calling himself Lord of the Manor. He acquired extensive stretches of the prime salmon rivers of the Hodder and Ribble. These bordered those fishing rights of Stonyhurst College. The two owners, Stonyhurst and the Fenton family, viewed their rivers in very different ways. For the Fentons, rivers meant that sport which befitted a gentleman. For the college, the rivers meant abundant supplies of fish, essential to feed a large Catholic community on the frequent fast days laid down by the church. This image, known as Keeper's Rest, shows a group probably including the college gamekeeper in the white hat with the shotgun. Roger Fenton inherited from his grandfather a substantial legacy, which included ownership of a farm in Lamming-Clough Lane in Hurst Green. This village, on the doorstep of the college, also housed a number of Fenton family bobbin mills, seen here. These mills turned timber into wooden bobbins, essential for the function of the Fenton cotton mills in Rochdale. So how did Roger Fenton manage to get himself invited into the very enclosed community at Stonyhurst? It seems that his invitation came about through the scientific curiosity of Father William Kay, who you can see here. The Jesuit order have long been associated with scientific and astronomical research. There are in fact 29 craters on the moon named after Jesuit astronomers. The college's Meteorological Observatory, as you can see here, was built in 1838 and undertook a variety of groundbreaking experiments, not only in meteorological examinations, but also electromagnetism, carried out in a specially designed underground magnetic chamber. In 1860, Stonyhurst was designated as an official government meteorological station. And here you can see Father Kay taking various readings in front of the observatory. Professor William Kay, seen here reading his breviary, was a former pupil of the college, and he arrived back at Stonyhurst in 1857 when he was appointed Director of Science. While pursuing his Jesuit seminary philosophical and theological studies, he also studied chemistry and experimental physics in London and Paris, in London specifically under Faraday. It is understandable that Kay's engagement with chemistry and physics would lead him to want to know more about his neighbour's pioneering work in the new medium of photography. In the summer of 1859, Roger Fenton was invited to photograph inside the college, including taking images of pupils and priests. You have to understand, for a very secretive and guarded community, this was a huge concession and a great indication of trust in Roger Fenton as an individual. On the 17th of November in 1859, Father Kay gave a lecture in the college's academy room on photography, the new science. Shortly afterwards, the College Photographic Society was set up. Roger Fenton must have played an integral part in this. I have to say, this photograph dates from a few years later, but it's one of my favourite pictures. Can you imagine standing up in front of this group of people and talking? So let's look at 3 of Roger Fenton's Stonyhurst works from the point of view of college history. I have to say, this is my favourite Fenton Stonyhurst photograph, although it's a close call with many others. It depicts what we call the top refectory, which was in fact the Great Hall of the Elizabethan house, built and completed in 1605, and the dining room of the pupils for many years. Fenton took more than one image of the top ref. This one also dates from 1859. From a social history perspective, this is a very fascinating picture. The boys are seated at their supper, a meal of bread, butter, and hot milk. A priest keeps order. There are 2 opinions as to why the boys are only seated on one side of the tables. One view says that this prevented them from chatting during the obligatory readings of the Catholic Martyrology, which took place at all meals. Another says it could just as feasibly have been that Roger Fenton requested the pupils to be seated a little bit like the Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper, on one side of the table only, so that he didn't have to photograph the backs of boys' heads. The gas jets you can see from the ceiling were installed in 1811. Stonyhurst was the first public building in England to be gaslit, another example of the scientific advancement engendered by the Jesuits. And we still use these very sturdy neo-Gothic trestle tables that you can see there. But back to this quieter, more reflective image. It shows a small group of domestic servants, men and boys, standing in dignified silence. The composition is monumentally classical in its effect. The shadows and chiaroscuro reminiscent of an old master. And the menial work of the domestic staff has been dignified, and the viewer is encouraged to ponder who these people are, unusual at a time when good servants were expected to be invisible. Obviously, the stillness of the pose is imposed by the need to avoid movement while the object was being taken, while the image was being taken. But Roger Fenton has used this necessity and turned it to considerable artistic benefit. The circular wooden trays carried by the young boys in the picture contains the pupils' lunchtime ration, half a pound of beef or mutton, and half a pound of boiled potatoes and root vegetables. These heavy wooden trays were carried round the tables by the young boys from pupil to pupil, who speared the biggest bits they could and haggled over who could have extra spuds. For me, the image conveys some of the humanity shown by William Hogarth in this 1750 portrait of his own servants. It should also be noted that Joseph Fenton, Fenton's grandfather, was widely regarded in the region as a fair and decent employer, an unusual distinction in those days, who built 300 fine dwellings for his mill workers. Although this is probably not the best image of the famous Elizabethan and Victorian facade of Stonyhurst, it tells some intriguing stories of life at the college in 1859. Before the completion in 1850 of the amazing 7 million brick 49 arch viaduct spanning the long valley from Blackburn across to Whalley, 3 miles from Stonyhurst, there was no realistic chance of pupils returning home for the holidays. From 1593 until 1872, when a functioning system of efficient national railway lines made long-distance travel a viable prospect, pupils spent the entirety of their 8 years' education at the college. They would leave home as 10-year-old boys and return home as 18-year-old young men. So in 1859, Roger Fenton was able to photograph the phenomenon of pupils on the ice in their Christmas holidays. The 2 ornamental canals in front of the college date back to the 17th century and are part of an elaborate system of fish hatcheries, sluices and watermills, dressed up as Baroque water features. In the cold winters before modern climate change, they froze regularly, and such days were celebrated with release from classes, rum punch, brass bands, hot pies, and burning braziers into the night. As Roger Fenton lived close by, it would have been relatively easy for him to arrive at the college on one of these impromptu frozen days and recruit a number of willing pupils to pose on the ice. The boys' skates consisted of iron blades screwed into the thick leather soles of their boots. This photograph is traditionally entitled Christmas Day, 1859, but the college archives record skating days only on the 15th, 18th, 22nd, and 23rd of December. And in fact, an existing Fenton study of this same occasion is dated the 23rd of December, 1859. My third photograph is usually entitled Hodder Ruffs. The foliage on the trees indicates that it was taken in the summer of 1859. The lack of wind is evident from the sharp focus of the branches. The only movement is the blurry, smoky water as it makes its way over the rocks. Unlike the majority of Fenton's Hodder and Ribble photographs, which show the excellent salmon pools and demonstrate the Fenton family ownership of them, this image shows another use of the river. The cut stone steps behind the two young Stonyhurst pupils lead to some 40 rustic stone changing rooms or bathing cots built along the riverbank. These provided practical facilities for depositing clothes and shoes. River bathing was an essential part of the boys' hygiene, and also, in the warm weather at least, provided pleasant recreation. Bathing in the open air at all seasons was required and continued until 1881, when the college built what might be the first indoor swimming pool in an English school. In this swimming pool, the fell water was piped brackish brown over the heating system to create a steaming Jurassic swamp in which boys disappeared once submerged more than a foot or so. And although the bathing cots are long fallen into dereliction, this is still a popular bathing place, although I believe it's called wild swimming nowadays, for those who know how to find it. And I'm not going to tell you where it is. This is my children's favourite spot for swimming, and they'd be very cross if I explained how to find it. Its beauty is as engaging now as it was in Roger Fenton's day. The piece is very occasionally disturbed by the brilliance of a kingfisher or the leap of a salmon. And I'll leave you with a few further observations. After Roger Fenton's death, James Fenton built an elaborate shooting lodge in 1871 just outside Longridge, called Dutton Manor, and he became a close friend to the college. Known as Squire Fenton, he provided convivial hunting breakfasts for the older pupils and the gentlemen philosophers at the college. The gentlemen philosophers were undergraduates. From 1840 until 1916, Stonyhurst was also a university, affiliated to the University of London. It provided a university education for Catholics who were not able to obtain this in their own country. These gentlemen studied a variety of courses, from classics and foreign languages and English literature to medicine, engineering, hydraulics, and physics. The 30 or 40 gentlemen philosophers who attended this school every year were regarded as little short of heroes by the boys. They were allowed to have horses and shotguns and grow beards and drink alcohol. Many of them did some fine work. Many of them came for a finishing education in which the hunting and shooting and the convivial breakfasts provided by Squire Fenton were an extremely important part. James Fenton was also a keen and informed collector of art. In 1890, he donated 2 prestigious paintings to the college, now sadly no longer with us, and only one of which has been recorded in an engraving by James Northcote, The Disobedient Prophet, and a similar painting by Westlake showing probably 2 of the earliest images of lions in English art. These were large and dramatic artworks, fit to join the 600 or so other Old Master and Victorian paintings lining the walls of the college. Roger Fenton's engagement with the college and his widely displayed photographs also inspired another great photographer. Tim Hetherington attended Stonyhurst in the 1980s. His own award-winning work, shot in the conflicts of the early 21st century, reflects something of the intense humanity seen in Fenton's work. Tim would have been familiar with the paintings, with the photographs of Fenton displayed around the college. And Tim's mother, a few years ago, donated a major collection of his 2007 Afghanistan photographs. This one, described, "You never see them like this," is one of my favorites. Tim's intensely psychologically human photographs hang at the college alongside Roger Fenton's intensely human and psychological photographs, separated by a bare 150 years of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing the pictures. I hadn't been aware of the Tim Hetherington connection, and that really is a very special connection for the college. If anyone would like to ask any questions, then please do so. Please use the chat to do so. A couple of questions I've got in advance. You mentioned Father K's lecture on photography and the fact that it possibly acted as a catalyst for the formation of a photographic society at the college. Do you have any details of what was in Father K's lecture, and is the society still active?
The first question, no, not a clue. It's very sad. The archives are completely blank on that. But these lectures in the academy room were public, so they were quite major events. And I can only imagine that Father K would have wanted to make a big splash concerning not only the involvement of Roger Fenton, because we're a small community, and his involvement in the college would have been very well noticed. But no, we have no details at all. The photographic club, we have probably between 4,000 and 5,000 images of the college and surrounding buildings from about 1880 up to the 1920s, which were produced in-house, as it were. Yes, the photographic club is still going, and it's very much a feature of not only of the pupils' extracurricular activities, but also of the art A-level and the IB formal programme.
Sounds like the RPS should be doing some support with the students.
Yes.
We should talk about that separately, but there's questions coming in from others now. First one is from Paul Cordis, and Paul's asking whether there are any photographs attributed to Father K at the college.
We don't have any attributed to Father K, but what we're beginning to do is to try and work out those images that were taken after Fenton, that must have been taken under Father K's tutelage. My supposition is that Kay learned the process from Fenton and then set up the system. The dark room still exists, and we have probably 5,000 or 6,000 glass negatives, but they're mostly of the glass, the sort of the lantern slide type. We do have a number of pictures which I think we need to look at more closely, and I'd be very grateful for anybody who'd like to come in and help us.
You might find.
Sure we would, yes.
There's a question here from Stephen Joseph. Hello, Stephen. Nice to see you here. Stephen's asking, how are the prints stored, and were they originally kept in portfolios?
The prints are now stored in professional Melinex sleeves, in proper acid-free boxes. They were originally kept in a sort of large Victorian collapsing leather portfolio, which I preserved because it's a beautiful thing, but I have taken the pictures out of it because it was extremely perilous. If there were any original containers, envelopes for them, they don't survive. The three sets that we have, there are two sets that were donated by Fenton to the college in 1859, 1860. They were sadly framed in the way that things were at the time, in acidic mounts with solid wooden backboards. And so you might have seen from some of the images that I showed, there's a lot of acidic damage. The exciting collection is 20 of the images that were bought by another interesting photographic pioneer called Alexander Hill Gray. Roger Taylor will be very familiar with Alexander Hill Gray's collection. He was a pupil at the college who left in 1858, so shortly before Fenton arrived at the college, who went out to India as an interpreter with the Sikh cavalry, and then amassed between 1859 and 1870 6,000 early photographs, including 20 Fentons of the college and the surrounding, which are in mint condition because they've been pasted into huge Victorian volumes which have been kept shut. These photographs go from, they span the British Isles, Europe, they go to the Middle East, to Bhutan, to Kimberley, to Africa, to Borneo, Russia, to the Far East. Some of them, and I'm still working with Roger on identifying, some of them are unique, some of them are by well-known photographers. So that's a very interesting area of the collection that I'm hoping to open up to experts. So some of the pictures, some of the photographs have been badly displayed and badly damaged, but at least 20 of them are in impeccable condition.
Thank you for that. That sounds like an amazing collection. Again, not one I'd been aware of. So there's a question here from Ian Wallace, and I know Stonyhurst has been very generous in allowing the historical group to visit, I believe, on 2 occasions. And Ian is asking, are the Fenton albums at the school available for public viewing at any time?
At the moment, in what we call these strange and bizarre times, no, sadly not. But hopefully from the spring, when things begin to open up again, we welcome visits, academic scholarly visits from, at any time. Just contact me. And the other thing that we're hoping to do is to set up virtual collections online. So we will be digitizing these objects, these photographs, and making them available online. But yes, once the school is open and once the pandemic is over, you're very welcome to come and visit. And the amazing thing about the college is you come to look at one thing and you suddenly realize that you're off on a tangent. Alexander Hill Gray, of these amazing photographs, also donated artifacts from Borneo and Bhutan, and antlers and trophies, and his diaries and so on. So there's all these extraordinary things, sort of footpaths to weave down. So yes, we're very happy to invite people to come and visit us.
Thank you. Roger Fenton is asking, does the college have a copy of the James Craig Annan photograph of Stonyhurst taken sometime before 1908?
I don't know. It's a very short answer. I will have to go and look for that. I'm writing it down right now. And Michael, if you could perhaps maybe put us in touch, I will. Roger's
one of our members, so I can very happy to do that. And as a follow-up question, he's also asking whether there's any record of Annan having formally visited the college.
Again, I'll have to look. The wonderful thing about the Jesuits is that they are super efficient recorders. So we have what's called the minister's logbook, whereby the minister, who is in charge of feeding people, which is a financially recordable activity. So the minister would write down every day who came, what they ate, how much it cost, where they stayed. And these records go from, at Stonyhurst, from the 1790s right up until the 1950s. So I can look that up and find out for you very easily.
Thank you. I shall put you in touch with Roger.
Thank you.
There's a question from Rebecca now asking whether you have any stereo views of Stonyhurst by Fenton, and I'll probably add a follow-up for her as well. Perhaps do you have any other stereoscopic material within the collections?
Yes to both. Yes, we have a limited number of stereoscope views, and we have a considerable number of others. I have to again say I'm not an expert in these areas, and my guide has been Roger Taylor in all of this. But yes, we do. So get in touch.
I'll introduce Rebecca to you. You mentioned that you've got a large collection of perhaps partly undiscovered lantern material and later photography. Can you talk a little bit more about what might be contained within that, or perhaps some of the highlights that you maybe are aware of at this point?
These were largely, as far as I can see, the sorts of things that were displayed or showed to the pupils on wet evenings in the winter. They date from, such exciting things as a trip to the Swiss Tyrol on my summer holidays. There are vast numbers of these things, and I don't even know how to begin to catalogue them. So again, if anybody is interested in them, come and have a look, and I'll make them available to you. We still have the original magic lantern, or the lantern slide as well.
Right, thank you. Final plea, if anyone does have any further questions for Jan, then please do drop them into the chat. Gilly, I just wondered whether you wanted to ask Jan any questions.
Yes, I do actually. I meant to ask before, you know, how and why did she become a curator, and who encouraged her?
That's a very dodgy story. From the age of about 9, I wanted to be a vet. And so I chose,
Girls do.
I was kind of inspired by the James Herriot novels. That was my main aim in life. So at school, I took entirely sciences. And then when I was 16, I got all the sciences needed to be accepted to veterinary school, but was too young to go to university. So had to spend an extra 2 years at school and decided to read art history. And suddenly decided
That was it.
this is much, much more exciting. So I read art history at St Andrews, and then started work at Glasgow Art Gallery as a very, very junior research assistant. And I don't know if any of you know Glasgow Art Gallery. It's an extraordinary place. It's a bit like Stonyhurst. It has a wonderful collection of paintings and watercolors, which I was working on, but it also has natural history objects, just about everything you could possibly imagine. It's one of those great Victorian collections. And the curators there were incredibly generous with their time. So I spent a lot of time in the taxidermy department. I'm not going to tell you the stories because I'm not. But I think sparked my present interest and expertise in the preservation of human remains.
Yes.
I am something relics. Yeah, I mean, basically, I deal with human body parts from the last 2,000 years, from the early Roman period up to the most recent one that we have is 1980, is Oscar Romero. So preserving human remains and the human body parts is something of an expertise of mine. If I don't know if I can show you this, I've got a skull behind me, which I think is dates from a late 17th century martyr. There's a big hole in the top of the cranium, which indicates that it was stuck on a spike. This is the sort of thing that excites me. So
it's very gruesome and grim. Not so your eye of Edward somebody.
Oh, the eye of Edward Oldcorn is probably the most exciting.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Should we bring it back to science and photography, because we've got a couple more questions that have come in. Alan Hodgson, who's president of the Royal Photographic Society, is asking, well, he's saying that the Jesuits have a history in astronomy, and I think you mentioned the observatory. Do you have any astronomical photographs in the collection?
Yes, we do. We have, again, they're all glass negatives. I'm not sure how many there are, but there are several thousand. It's an extraordinary mixture of professional slides, which were bought from firms in Manchester and the north of England selling such things. And a large number of them, however, are slides generated within the college from, I would say, from the 1860s onwards. Again, I'm not an expert. I preserved these things and kept them safe. We have the meteorological and astronomical records of the college going back to the 1850s. And we're looking really to invite partners in to become, you know, academic partners to help us expose and work on these. The observatory still functions. We take pupils out there. I have to say Lancashire's not the best place to observe the heavens. But yes, it is a bit damp, but that sort of scientific legacy is very important to us. The method for measuring sunspots, the original method for measuring sunspots, was known as the Stonyhurst method, and it was devised by Father Perry. And there are all sorts of other wonderful links. Gerard Manley Hopkins, the wonderful poet, taught here, and as well as teaching classics and writing about the beauties of Ribblesdale and poems about the beautiful landscape, he was also the deputy director of the observatory. So he wrote the observations of the post-Krakatoa phenomenon of the sunsets around Lancashire. And those are just extraordinary, where he's describing the fields as quilted like crimson ice with these sort of vague green sulfuric floating heavens over them. So it's something that spans science and art and literature. Yeah.
I think I may ask the last question then, because I think we may have reached the end of our audience's questions. So thank you for those of you that did ask questions. I think I'd like to ask really about the books behind you, and specifically around photography. You're quite clearly in a rather wonderful library. What sort of photographic books do you have in there? Are there any very early books from the 1840s, 50s or 60s to do with photography?
We do have a number of early photographic books, not as many as I would like. The books you can see behind me are mostly 17th century drama texts, which were written by former pupils at the college. There are about between 70 and 100,000 books in the library, mostly, as you'd expect in a place like this, philosophical, religious, theological texts. But there is a substantial number of scientific texts, and a lot of 17th and 18th century Jesuit texts on optics and on the science of observation, of optometrics and so on. I don't know if you're aware of Athanasius Kircher.
Yes.
Yes, we have a number of his books described as the last man who knew everything.
That's Michael.
I think on that note then, thank you for answering my questions, and Gilly, I'll hand back to you then to close the presentation in the evening.
Well, I think that's been an absolutely amazing presentation. It was wonderful. All the different photographs, and Stonyhurst is such an incredible place. There's so many resources and things. It's quite incredible. Thank you ever so much for talking to us about this. And I meant to ask you before whether you had a teaching role, and I know you did tell me earlier that you did have a teaching role and that you encouraged youngsters, and you actually have a course on that. So if you could just say a bit about that.
We have this wonderful thing called Junior Curators, which is 10-year-olds basically. You teach them how to present objects, how to present a space. So it's a bit of rhetoric, and it's a bit of showmanship, but also, you know, how you can interpret an object, how you look at it from a scientific point of view, so that you know how to handle it without damaging it or without damaging yourself. And the end of this 10-week program that we run ends up with the children devising their own tour of the whole college to their parents, where they are the presenters and the sort of explainers of these spaces. And I think that's one of the most exciting and moving things that we do. And it's not only with the college, we do this with other local schools. It can be done distantly as well. So we have a great partnership with a school in Anfield in Liverpool who come and do the same course.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yes. And I think it's very good to encourage the youngsters to do that.
Has to be done.
And thank you very, very much for your time. And I just haven't seen a lot of those photographs before, and they're very interesting. And thank you ever so much.
On behalf of the Royal Photographic Society, again, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening, Jan, and thank you everyone who's taken the time to listen this evening as well. We appreciate that, and we will make the recording available from tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gilly, and thank you, Jan.